Perhaps the two most powerful empires the world has ever seen were the Roman Empire and the current American Empire. At the height of their power, they had vast riches and powerful armies that dwarfed any other power in the world. All of the races and nations admired and wanted to be a part of those empires, and those that did not were crushed. History has shown over and over again that empires of this unrivaled power are never ever conquered. Rather, they suffer from a rot within. Both the Roman and the American empires collapsed internally as they descended into decadence, debt, and death. Most historians typically cite collapse of empires as a result of a constant state of foreign wars, a growing bureaucracy of the state, and an increasingly ignorant masses deluded by bread and circuses.
Like millions of poor Romans, he lived on welfare handouts of grain and mindless distraction.
And devote their whole life to drink, gambling, brothels, shows, and chariot races. Their temple, their dwelling, their meeting place, in fact the center of all their desires, is the Circus Maximus. They talk about nothing else.
The combination of expenses and the depreciating productivity that eventually leads to the debasement of the currency and ultimately the end of the empire.
The only way to maintain this gigantic military machine was taxation. Taxes rose and inflation spiraled. Roman currency, the denarius, was progressively devalued.
While scholars would typically argue that same story, we feel that there's a larger issue that humanity is afraid to come to terms with. The real cause of the collapse of the Roman and American empires was the psychopathic element that rots anything it touches.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive the treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly, but the traitor moves amongst those within the gate freely, his sly whispers rustling throughout the alleyways, heard in the very halls of government itself. For the traitor appears not a traitor. He speaks in accents familiar to his victims. He wears their face and their arguments. He appeals to the baseness that lies deep within the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of the city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. A murderer is less to be feared. The traitor is the plague. Marcus Cicero. There are only two kinds of people in this world, those that want to be left alone and those that won't leave you alone. Most people do what they want to do, love who they want to love, and provide abundant gifts to the world. Then there are those who just have this sickness in them that wants to destroy everything that is good. It is not that power corrupts, it is that the corrupt seek power. This psychopathic element in humanity gravitates towards collective power like moths to a flame. They want to control others and find positions of power to lord over others. This could be as small as a school board or as high up as the President of the United States. No matter what, they just won't leave you alone. This psychopathic element is a group of hurt people that want to continue to hurt others. Knowing that they cannot maintain individual relationships for very long, they thirst for collective power and rise to the top of every power structure as they seek to control anyone in their lives. It doesn't matter how large or small of the organization, the cunning always rise to the top. Most people cannot comprehend how this psychopath thinks and would rather suck their thumb of denial than to even contemplate the sickness in their sights. In time, these cunning psychopaths work like a slow poison on any organization that they are in. They force out the good and promote the bad. As they become more powerful, the more compulsive they will be, to the point where they can no longer hide their sickness. Sensing the end of their unstable nature, they begin to become more erratic and dangerous. The Roman Empire Diocletian set fire to his own palace to distract the empire from his rot and blame the Christians. Other false flags have been used throughout the ages to blame innocent victims and hide this psychopathic rot within. When these power-hungry psychopaths are confronted with their antisocial behavior, they act indignant or accuse others of being crazy.
Side job? How dare you? How dare you?
This results in most people turning a blind eye to the disturbing and cunning psychopaths they clearly see. For the psychopath counts on good people doing nothing as they become more aggressive and powerful. The depraved Roman Emperor Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus presided over the end of the Roman Empire. Nero was the last in line of the Julio-Claudian Roman dynasty. He ruled with extravagant trips, lavish parties, monstrous deaths, brutal wars, and persecutions. Nero would often have Christians dipped in oil and set them on fire to light his garden at night. Nero was that sick psychopath at the top of the most powerful collective power the world has ever seen. Nero is perhaps best known for fiddling while Rome burned. Most people would think that Nero was aloof as his empire burned, but they would be wrong. Nero was a psychopath and actually loved the destruction of his empire, as shown in his very own poem titled Civilization. Traveling through pretty scenery, orchards and valleys and so on, we find a place that is brown and barren, with filthy pigs lolling in the sun. Stop, everybody. This is the landscape for me, devastated by pigs who have chewed up the last twig and hosed out every gully with their urine. A pasture for gourmets who lick their plate clean. Here a man can feel at home. As the Roman Emperor Nero descended into depravity, he eventually faced revolt from his own generals across the empire, as well as his own Praetorian Guard. Nero fled Rome and committed suicide June 9, 68 AD. The Roman Empire was mortally wounded and had 4 emperors in the following year. The depravity and arrogance of one psychopathic man destroyed the largest empire the world had ever seen. Forever struck in silver, Nero rings clearly throughout the ages of what can happen when humanity collectively supports the worst in humanity. Now is the time for the collapse of the American Empire, as things that cannot go on forever simply won't. The slow-motion collapse that has been in works for decades, as more power is given to this psychopathic element that only seeks more debt and death. Like the original Roman Republic, the once great American Republic has slowly been transformed into what can only be called the Debt and Death Empire. The American people go busy about their lives, never looking at the evil that they empower every day with their consumption, their votes, and their careers. The psychopathic element within the United States has consistently and methodically teared down our freedoms and further their means of our control.
Is that he's a tool of the rich. I personally like that very much. My father told me that's the way the system is meant to work. Soon I think he's going to be in a position for the Trilateral Commission, and if he shows promise beyond that, there's Bilderberg, world control. Settle for nothing else.
One man now sits on the throne of power at the top of the American empire, Barack Hussein Obama. The one man that came out of nowhere on a wave of hope and change. The one man that has since done only more of the same. He will be the one man that future generations will look back and wonder how a nation so powerful could fall for such a puppet. We find most criticism of Barack Obama is purposely and childishly focused on emotional hot-button issues like his birth certificate, his mother's pornography, his pot smoking, his sexual orientation, or even the gender of his wife.
No, Michelle is a
I'm sorry, she's a what?
a transgender. We all know.
Oh my gosh.
These emotional distractions are purposely done to keep the false paradigm from chugging along, while never bringing into question the issues that transcend the puppets and challenge the institutions, the systems, and the consciousness that allows these parasites to rise to power in the first place. They cannot possibly allow individuals to challenge the actual system, because once people see the nature of this power structure, people will simply walk away and withdraw their power.
Memorable time of my life. It was a touching moment because I never thought this day would ever happen. I won't have to worry about putting gas in my car. I won't have to worry about paying my mortgage. You know, if I help him, he's gonna help me.
These psychopathic parasites must keep you in their rig game to prey on your energy.
I started getting a little more educated about politics and reading more. What I learned is never trust the wizard. It's within ourselves to have the determination, the courage, and the brains to bring us to our destiny.
For without you, they are nothing. So instead of hacking at the emotional hot-button branches, we will focus on the logical root of the problem. Throughout this series, we will see the real problems that we face when we enable the worst in humanity, and how individuals walking away from this inevitable collective collapse is the only true solution. Now we will look at the 7 sins of Obama, that will ultimately condemn this puppet politician to ring throughout the ages as the Nero of the American Empire.
We will change you, Dr. Jones. All of you, from the inside. We will turn you into us. And the best part, you won't even know it's happening.
I have always sensed the Obama birth certificate movement was a grand distraction, and soon found out why. Barack Obama set the narrative about his past with his book called Dreams of My Father, but the truth is far from what is written in there. In a Hegelian dialectic, the psychopathic elite provide a thesis, like that of Dreams of My Father, and then an antithesis of the birther movement. This is to corral all people into the dialectic that they control both sides of. Hegelian dialectics are most obvious to people with the rigged Democratic and Republican parties. After all the decades of no real hope or change, despite who is in power, it is clear that the game is rigged against us. While Barack Obama's birth is certainly something to question, it is not where he was born. Now, I don't get shocked too often anymore after nearly a decade of doing this, but if what I found is to be true, it is certainly very disturbing. Not only about what I found, but that this could be hidden from the public. And even more disturbing is how high they push this intellectually rotten man into the office of the President of the United States. I would ask that you keep an open mind and to always do your own research, which is why I often say listen to all and follow none.
My father was a foreign student, born and raised in a small village in Kenya. He grew up herding goats. My father grew up herding goats in Kenya.
Barack Obama's upbringing is not this lovely story about a Kansas girl who fell in love with a Kenyan sheep herder. The truth is closer to that his early life was shaped by a fascist CIA and a card-carrying communist. He is the perfect collectivist hybrid. Once you see all the evidence that's presented in the 7 Sins of Obama, you will see that nothing of any importance ever happens by accident, and why the final 2 years of Obama's term in office could be the most dangerous time in American history. How is it possible for this guy who's literally done nothing of any importance become the President of the United States? It is simple. Politicians are nothing more than cleverly packaged puppets for us to place all of our faith and hope into.
The clever young man who recently made it to the White House is a very fine hypnotist. Partly because it is indeed extraordinary to see an African American at the pinnacle of power in the land of slavery. However, this is the 21st century, and race, together with gender and even class, can be very seductive tools of propaganda. He's a marketing dream. But like Calvin Klein or Benetton, he's a brand that promises something special, something exciting, almost risque, as if he might be radical, as if he might enact change. He makes people feel good. He's a postmodern man with no political baggage, and all that's fake.
And when one of them fails us, we are trotted out a brand new and improved puppet into the game.
We're gonna spread happiness. We're gonna spread freedom. Obama's gonna change it. Obama's gonna lead them.
No one makes it to the top without a lot of hidden power behind them pulling the strings. When you learn the real story about Barack Obama, it will prove that there is no collective hope to fix this collectivist problem. For there are obvious powers that can manipulate any organization, squash any dissent, and tell any lie to move their collectivist agenda forward.
Because of Obama, I'm inspired to be the next entrepreneur.
Individuals must focus their energy into things that they can control and prepare for this collective collapse that is coming. Real skills, real friends, real assets. Barack Obama's maternal grandfather was Stanley Dunham. After World War II, he worked in Air Force intelligence and then the CIA. He was eventually stationed in Beirut in 1953. He claimed to work as a furniture salesman when he got back to the States, but that was just a cover for his CIA duties. In 1959, he was brought to Hawaii to be part of Operation Airlift Africa. The airlift was a CIA operation to train and indoctrinate future agents of influence in Africa. which is becoming a battleground between the United States and the Soviet Union for influence among the newly independent and soon-to-be independent countries on the continent. That is where Stanley Dunham welcomed Barack Obama Sr. in August of 1959 as a part of 280 East African students brought to Hawaii to be indoctrinated. Stanley's teenage daughter and Barack Obama's mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, met Barack Obama Sr. in 1959 at the University of Hawaii. Young African students were brought to the United States to attend various colleges, and they were merely aided by a grant from Joseph P. Kennedy Foundation. Now that is just one side of the narrative. When I went looking further into this fairy tale, I ran across a book and a documentary called Dreams of My Real Father that showed Barack Obama's real father as a card-carrying communist named Frank Marshall Davis. I found this story very compelling, and while there's no confessions or hard evidence to suggest that this man is Barack Obama's real father, I believe that all the evidence presented is very clear that he indeed is Barack Obama's father, and that this man is very disturbing. In Barack Obama's very own book, Dreams of My Father, he refers 22 times to a prominent personal mentor named only Frank. There is good reason why Obama hid this man Frank from the public eye, because that man is Frank Marshall Davis. Frank Marshall Davis was a radical communist journalist that worked for the Chicago Star. He also wrote communist and anti-Christian poetry.
Take it then from the carelessness of the money drunk. Place it in the reaching hands of the little people.
Your tales about Jesus of Nazareth are no good with me. Grace is a Dixie nigger.
The FBI first tracked Frank Marshall Davis in 1944 as he was considered one of the most important communists to arrest should war break out with Russia. It is believed that his FBI file is over 600 pages long. Frank Marshall Davis moved to Hawaii in 1949.
Struggles by the labor movement against racism brought together Davis and Harry Bridges, leader of the International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union. Bridges and the ILWU were influential in Frank's decision to experience Hawaii,
where he helped organize the communist-controlled International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union in a failed attempt to take over the Hawaiian government.
Crisis in Honolulu, caught like the rest of Hawaii in the paralyzing grip of a dockman's strike.
I met all of the ILWU top brass.
Even the Hawaiian NAACP chapter complained to its national office, quote, Comrade Frank Marshall Davis suddenly appeared on the scene to propagandize the membership with the purpose of converting it into a front for the Stalinist line. In 1956, Frank Marshall Davis was subpoenaed to the Senate Subcommittee on Un-American Activities.
The Eastland Committee, I was under subpoena then to testify.
And all he did was plead the Fifth.
That would indicate that I had been a member of the Communist Party, and I have never told anybody that.
Stanley Dunham used his furniture salesman cover to contact known communists for the CIA. During one of those occasions, his teenage daughter, Ann Dunham, met Frank Marshall Davis. Ann must have been attracted to him because he loved poetry, jazz music, and specialized in nude photography.
The Lens Camera Club. I have to have been president of it.
The young teenager, Ann Dunham, saw this as a rebellious person to be around since her father had uprooted her from her friends in Seattle and moved her halfway across the world to Hawaii during her most formative years. During one of those occasions, she allowed Frank Marshall Davis to take the now famous nude photos of her.
I have a collection of intimate portraits, old horizontal cameos.
These naked Christmas photos were taken within weeks of Barack Obama being conceived. When Ann found out that she was pregnant, she told her father, and he was furious. Since the age of consent for sex was 14 in Hawaii, no crime had been committed, and abortion was illegal and dangerous. What is worse for Stanley Dunham is that his daughter was now pregnant with a known communist under FBI surveillance. Stanley met with Frank Marshall Davis, and Frank said that he was sorry, but that he was married to a white woman and had 5 kids of his own. Stanley Dunham then got one of his young African airlift students, who desperately needed money, to claim to be the dad of Ann's illegitimate black baby. Now, Ann Dunham had known Barack Obama Sr. from her Russian language class, Barack Obama Sr. agreed to the sham marriage, knowing that if he had married an American citizen, he could extend his visa and eventually went on to Harvard. This despite Barack Obama Sr. being married and having 2 children back in Kenya. The 3-month pregnant Ann Dunham married Barack Obama Sr. in February 1961. Barack was born in August 1961, and 1 month later, in September 1961, she moved to Seattle without Barack Obama Sr., her husband, as he stayed in Hawaii and eventually went on to Harvard. They were divorced in 1964, a total sham marriage. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that Frank Marshall Davis is the real father of Barack Hussein Obama. As if the timing and the nature of their relationship from the nude Christmas photos weren't enough, Barack Obama's physical similarities are striking to Frank Marshall Davis, and Barack looks nothing like his supposed Kenyan father. Obama has Ann Dunham's long chin, but his eyes, nose, mouth, age spots, and exact height of Frank Marshall Davis. There are a lot of videos on YouTube that do a lot more detailed photo comparison, and I highly suggest that you look for yourself. What is even more striking is the intellectual foundation of Frank Marshall Davis. He wrote tons of articles about socialized medicine, nationalization of industry, and wealth distribution.
The trick, this is one of the few areas where I think there are technical issues that have to be dealt with as opposed to just political issues. I think the trick is figuring out how do we structure government systems that pool resources and hence facilitate some redistribution, because I actually believe in redistribution.
I won't have to worry about putting gas in my car. I won't have to worry about paying my mortgage. You know, if I help him, he's going to help me.
All of which now, Barack Obama has made the law of the land. Communism is alive and well in the United States. And it doesn't end there with the strange background of Barack Obama. After her divorce, Ann Dunham then moved to Hawaii and went to the CIA-connected East-West Center. Ann Dunham then met Lolo Soetoro in March of 1965. Soon after they met, Lolo left for Indonesia 3 months prior to a CIA coup against Sukarno that cost Indonesia 1 million lives. When Lolo returned, they got married in the Muslim faith in 1966 and moved to Indonesia in 1967. The sad thing is we'll never know the truth about Barack Obama's birth, because those who have proof stand the most to gain from keeping it secret. I encourage more people to investigate this and listen to all and follow none. We will take America without firing a shot. We will bury you. We cannot expect the American people to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can assist their elected leaders in giving them small doses of socialism until they awaken one day to find out that they have communism. We do not have to invade the United States. We will destroy you from within. Nikita Khrushchev. Communists have always viewed the victory over capitalism as an inevitability, whereas the excesses of capitalism would sow their own seeds of destruction. Its excesses and concentration of power would give violent rise to those left behind. But beyond the political theory, there's the practical ideological subversion and psychological warfare against the United States. Whereas these communists would not violently overthrow the United States, but would rather change them from within without us even knowing.
To place our thoughts into the minds of your leaders. Make your teachers teach the true version of history. Your soldiers attack on our command. We will change you, Dr. Jones. All of you, from the inside. We will turn you into us. And the best part, you won't even know it's happening.
Communists infiltrated academia, where they would shape the minds of a generation or two into communists.
Well, I've got videos, by the way. This election, we're going to vet him from his college days to show you racial division and class warfare are central to what Hope and Change was sold in 2008. The videos are going to come out. The narrative is going to come out that Barack Obama met a bunch of silver ponytails back in the 1980s, like Bill and Bernadine Dorn, who, equally radical, said one day we're going to have the presidency. And the rest of us slept while they plotted and they plotted and they plotted, and they oversaw hundreds of millions of dollars in the Annenberg Challenge, and they had real money from real capitalists who gave it on to their children and their children's children, and then they become communists.
Also, I had to find, one time they wanted me to find out if there was such a thing as a poison that was undetectable, especially one that seemed to mimic a heart attack, that would kill someone, but it would appear that they had a heart attack. I did find such a thing.
Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman, and a special one was developed which potentially would be able to enter the target without perception.
And one of the persons who spoke at that orientation was Professor Bell. And I remember him sauntering up to the front and not giving us a lecture, but engaging us in a conversation and speaking the truth and telling us that he has to learn at this place that I've carried with me ever since. Open up your hearts and your minds to the words of Professor Derek Bell. Open up your hearts and your minds to the words of Professor Derek Bell.
Derek Bell was a radical. Derek Bell was the Jeremiah Wright of academia. He had some crazy views. In fact, just 2 months before this speech was given, Derek Bell gave a controversial speech in Chicago where he said that America remains a racist country and the civil rights movement essentially was a sham because white supremacy remains the system and we've got to transform that system radically.
We live in this capitalist society, let's call it what it is, that by definition means that some people are going to make a whole lot of money, gain a whole lot of power by the exploitation, if we want to use that word, of a whole lot of other people. Now, in that kind of society, how do you keep the people down below from rising up? In fact, back when capitalism was getting really started, some of the great thinkers of the time felt it couldn't work. It couldn't work. Because the people down below would rise up, particularly if it was in a democratic situation where they could vote. Well, it has worked. And it's worked for a lot of reasons. There's just a sense that if you work hard, you can, the Alger, Horatio Alger stories are certainly there. And so there are many components, but one of them is to have a group identifiable who are deemed on the bottom. Even when they rise up, they're still on the bottom. Oh, there's exceptions. And so with that system, which we've been practicing for 300 years or more, even the lowliest, no account, unimpressive white man or woman can feel that somehow I'm superior.
Said one day we're going to have the presidency, and the rest of us slept while they plotted and they plotted and they plotted.
The Soviets had a four-stage plan to bring about the right crisis, to bring their hope and change.
Is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see, most of the people who graduated in the 60s dropouts or half-baked intellectuals are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., the world communist conspiracy. Whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
By all practical purposes, the United States today represents more of the Soviet Union than the constitutional republic it was started out as. Almost all 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are alive and well in America. This could not have happened without the persistent, covert, and systemic infiltration of communists that seek to destroy America from within. The gradual infiltration of these collectivists into government power positions have slowly transformed the nation of revolutionaries, settlers, farmers, innovators, and the most prosperous nation the world has ever seen into a nation of indoctrinated slaves living off the government teat. I think one of the most important things to understand about Barack Obama is that he studied at the leftist Columbia University. While Obama's transcripts are sealed, it is at the same time, and one would imagine given his political interest, that he would have studied under the radical professor and political activist Richard Cloward. He is famous for the Cloward-Piven strategy, as laid out in The Weight of the Poor, a strategy to end poverty. His idea was simple. The best way to end poverty, and to bring about communism, was to simply overload the system with spending and welfare so that it collapses, and out of the concocted crisis, collectivist power would bring about massive redistribution of wealth and a guaranteed income for all. I should also point out that this was predicted in 1934 in a Chicago Tribune political cartoon called A Planned Economy or A Planned Destruction. In this cartoon, it shows young pink communists drunk on power from Columbia and Harvard, both schools of which Barack Obama came from, depleting the resources of the soundest government in the world. And it shows a Trotsky figure on the bottom say, "Plan action for United States, spend, spend, spend under the guise of a recovery, bust the government, blame the capitalists for the failure."
Don't let anybody tell you that, it's corporations and businesses that create jobs. You know, that old theory, trickle-down economics. That has been tried. That has failed. It has failed rather spectacularly.
And junk the Constitution and declare a dictatorship. So here we are, 80 years later, 4 generations from the time that this cartoon was made, with the son of a communist, backed by Chicago Power, went to Columbia, went to Harvard, is now the President of the United States, has put this country into more debt than the 42 presidents combined before him, all to bring about a collectivist government to destroy the Constitution of the United States. All 7 sins are designed to overwhelm the system in a grand Cloward Piven strategy to bring about the right crisis for a tyrannical collectivist state.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
This will completely wipe out the middle class and reduce the entire nation to serfdom.
Everybody somewhere between the ages of 18 and 25 will serve 3 months of basic training and understanding in a kind of civil defense. That universal sense of service, somewhere between ages 18 and 25, will give Americans, once again, a sense of what they are to be American and their contribution to a country and a common experience.
This collectivist dream would leave a few well-connected individuals at the top, while the rest of humanity labors under the boot of the insiders.
Power over the human mind, and power over all matter, climate, disease, the laws of gravity, because we control the mind. Reality is inside the skulls. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
Despite the communist leanings of Barack Hussein Obama,
I think the trick is figuring out how do we structure government systems that pool resources and hence facilitate some redistribution, because I actually believe in redistribution.
his first job upon graduating law school was to go out and work for what he described in his book, The Dreams of My Father. Obama describes working at a, quote, consulting house for multinational corporations. He doesn't name the company that he works for in the book, because it's Business International Corporation, which has strong ties to the CIA. This would make sense because his mother, Ann Dunham, traveled the world doing economic anthropology for the CIA fronts like USAID and the Ford Foundation. Barack Hussein Obama clearly comes from a very shadowy background, and his rapid rise from community organizer to the US Senate is a whole nother issue. Obama didn't really make it onto the national radar until his 2004 US Senate race against Republican Jack Ryan. Jack Ryan was a very rich former Goldman Sachs banker who was married to actress Jeri Ryan, for whom he divorced in 1999. Jack Ryan was running to fill an incumbent Republican Senate seat and was considered a shoo-in compared to the nobody Obama. But it was the unprecedented release of Jack Ryan's sealed divorce record showing that Jack Ryan had sexual desires that turned off many voters, that thrusted Obama into the Senate seat in 2004. This is very suspicious timing. This was an unprecedented act, releasing sealed divorce and custody documents, and it has never happened before or after in American politics. Even John Kerry, who was running for president in the very same year, did not have to open his sealed divorce records, and that was for the President of the United States. It is this fact that without this very suspicious and underhanded effort, we probably never would have heard of Barack Hussein Obama. And despite the fact that he snuck into the Senate, and despite the fact that he accomplished absolutely nothing in the Senate, he had the arrogance to go run for the presidency after only being in the Senate after 2 years. Like I said before, nothing in this world happens by accident, and anyone that rises so quickly, having done so little, is obviously a bought and paid for puppet. Obama was the perfect package and was exactly the right hope and change the country was craving for after 8 years of another cleverly packaged sock puppet, George W. Bush. He was the perfect mix of race and age and provided an intoxicating mix for half the country to weep and cheer for. We saw the media practically coronated Obama as the second coming of Christ. Women were rapping for him.
'Cause I got a crush on Obama.
Children were singing for him.
We're gonna spread freedom.
Youth were marching for him. Despite having done nothing of any importance, he spouted well-crafted teleprompter talking points to crowds around the world, and they fawned for him. The 2008 campaign of Barack Obama was a whole lot of something for nothing. But all of that was not enough to secure the 2008 presidential race for Barack Obama. First, they needed to get the political royalty of Hillary Clinton to step aside.
While I was working on those streets, watching those folks see their jobs shipped overseas, you were a corporate lawyer sitting on the board of Walmart. I was fighting these fights. I was Cornelius Pike.
This was decided in a June 2008 Bilderberg meeting in Chantilly, Virginia. Both Obama and Hillary ditched their own press corps to sneak away for this secretive meeting. Again, this has never, ever happened before in presidential history. The Obama press corps was loaded onto a plane and they were told that Obama would join them. Once on board, the doors were closed and the plane took off without Obama.
Robert, why were we not told about this meeting and that the senator wouldn't be on our flight until the doors were shut and we were about to taxi to take off?
Again, we had a desire, Senator Obama had a desire to do some meetings. Others had a desire to meet with him tonight in a private way, and that's what we're doing.
Soon after that secretive Bilderberg meeting, Obama was the clear choice as Hillary stepped out of the race. To seal the deal for Obama, the controlled Republicans had to do their part in the fake cage match of the 2008 campaign and pick the least likable Republican in the world. Just like they did when the young baby boomer Democratic Bill Clinton came onto the scene from out of nowhere to win the presidency of the United States, the Republicans picked an out-of-touch old war vet to run against the young charismatic Democratic opponent. This ensured the Democratic victory. Throw in a 2008 financial crisis, and Obama was swept in with hope and change. We believe that Barack Hussein Obama was put into power and preside over the end of the American empire. He will be known as the Nero of the American empire, an outside puppet to blame the entire collapse of the American dream on. The one man whose systemic sins of greed, power, and corruption can neatly be laid to rest on the legacy Obama will leave behind. Nothing in Obama's past suggests that he's nothing more than a talking puppet and soon to be a sacrificial lamb. And now it is time to go through the 7 sins of Barack Obama. The first and probably most glaring one is the fact that this president came in on a wave of hope and change, vowing to close Guantanamo Bay, pull our troops out, end the wars, and within months of him coming into office, before he had done anything, Barack Obama wins the Nobel Peace Prize. This despite, during his administration, he has bombed 7 different countries, 3 more than George Bush did in his 8 years. During Obama's administration, he conducted 7 wars, including Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and Syria. To his credit, though, he didn't fall for the neocon ultimate dream of starting the war with Iran, which is exactly what Dick Cheney was plotting on doing in his final days of the Bush administration. According to Seymour Hersh, Dick Cheney was looking to create a false flag by building Iranian PT boats, putting American soldiers on it, and having those soldiers fire upon American ships, thereby causing a casus belli, or a cause to start a war with Iran.
Looking to cook up the next war, a false war based on false intelligence.
Among the items considered and rejected, which is why the New Yorker did not publish it on grounds that it wasn't accepted. One of the items was, why not, there was a dozen ideas proffered, how to trigger a war. The one that interested me the most was, why don't we in our shipyard build 4 or 5 Iranian boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them with a lot of arms, and the next time one of our boats goes through the Straits of Hormuz, start a shoot-up. Might cost some lives, and it was rejected because you can't have Americans killing Americans. But that's the level of stuff we were talking about, provocation.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked. which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why?
John Kerry and Obama even bumbled the Syrian invasion that they wanted so badly when they concocted false evidence of Bashar al-Assad chemically attacking his own people.
Anyone who could claim that an attack of this staggering scale could be contrived or fabricated needs to check their conscience and their own moral compass.
Well, this isn't regime change because we're not really positive who set off the gas. I mean, the group that's most likely to benefit from that is Al-Qaeda. They ignite some gas, some people die, and blame it on Assad. Assad, I don't think, is an idiot. I don't think he would do this on purpose in order for the whole world to come down on him.
When UN Weapon Inspector Carla Del Ponte proved that it wasn't Bashar al-Assad.
What appeared to our investigation that was used by the opponents, by the rebels, and we have no indication at all that the government, Syria, the authority of the Syria government, have used chemical weapons.
And yet the United States said it was a slam dunk and wanted to invade Syria and cause a regime change. Thankfully, Vladimir Putin said no to this, and the Chinese. And that started a turning point in how the world deals with the American hegemon. When the Obama administration could not get the war that they wanted in Syria, they created ISIS. After that failed attempt, surprisingly, a super villain team named ISIS was born with superpowers and weapons to scare the shit out of the ignorant masses. They have green screen beheadings, 7-foot-tall terrorists. They have cool cinematographers, like in Wag the Dog. They even have cool British accents, so you can actually hear their threats.
So any attempt by you, Obama, to deny the Muslims their rights of living in safety under the Islamic Caliphate will result in the bloodshed of your people.
And what we've suspected long time, that these ISIS beheadings were fake. I mean, there's so many examples of just discrepancies of like green screen acting and stuff like that. And it turns out this is apparently Cyber Berkut, which is kind of like a Russian anonymous hacker group. Supposedly got this from one of John McCain's staffers.
ISIS, which is a government-funded terrorist group, John McCain's buddies, ISIS, over there.
And on top of that, I am concerned about this report about Syrian rebels and the ceasefire with ISIS. Senator
Paul, that's not true.
Well,
it's not true.
It's not true.
Whether I don't care about the report. I know these people intimately. We talk to them all the time.
Cyber Berkut released the video, and it's just exactly what we thought: a cheap production of bad actors, poor quality of everything, and it's just them goofing around. And it's in front of a green screen. It looks like Jihadi John, and it shows how these guys, they weren't sweating, crying in the desert. When they go to cut their head, you don't see blood squirming all over the place. You don't even see the guy resisting. I mean, just even a basic human reaction to a knife being held to your throat, these guys would have done more than that. The CIA had a long history of creating and radicalizing Muslim extremist groups, arming them, and giving them marching orders to destabilize moderate Arab countries. It started with Zbigniew Brzezinski in the late 70s, funding and creating the Mujahideen.
That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day, because your fight will prevail, and you'll have your homes, your mosques back again, because your cause is right, and God is on your side.
That was the basis for Al-Qaeda that the CIA ran. The Bin Ladens and the Bushes were best friends.
But that wasn't all. A few years later, another oil company in which George W. Bush was involved needed cash. It got a reported $25 million, again, thanks in part to Bush's old Houston neighbor, Khalid bin Mahfouz, Osama bin Laden's brother-in-law.
When George W. Bush started his first oil company, who helped fund it? Osama bin Laden's brother and brother-in-law. True or false? B. After a terrorist bomb at a barracks in Saudi Arabia killed 19 Americans, who got the multi-million-dollar contract to rebuild? The bin Ladens. True or false? C. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, who was in a meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington? George Bush Sr. and Osama bin Laden's brother. True or false? Actually, the answer could be D, all of the above. Because believe it or not, as far-fetched as they sound, each and every one of those things, the bin Laden link to the Bush Oil Company, the bin Laden construction contract after the terrorist bomb, and the bin Laden-Bush meeting on 9/11, is true.
And during this age of terror, even Hillary Clinton had to admit that the United States creates the enemies that we end up fighting.
That we had a huge trust deficit, in part because the United States had, to be fair, we had helped to create the problem we're now fighting. How?
We also have a history of kind of moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
This is done purposely to destabilize moderate regimes so that we can put in our guys in power. Anybody who stands in the way of the United States petrodollar must be gotten rid of. We have even more crisis today. There's an estimated 250,000 Syrians that have died during that US-backed insurgency in Syria. Bashar al-Assad is not some gold AK-47 gun-toting Muslim dictator. He's a Western-educated ophthalmologist.
But why? I will tell you why. Because the West used to have puppets, not independent leaders or officials in any other country. And that's the problem with Putin. They demonize Putin because he can say no and he wants to be independent, because the West, especially the United States, don't accept partners. They only accept followers. Even Europe is not a partner of the United States. That's to be very frank with you. So this is their problem with Syria. They need somebody to keep saying yes, yes man, a puppet, a marionette, and so on.
Who married a British woman whose eloquence and grace rivals Princess Diana.
Think about when you put your children to bed at night. This is something I think about on a daily basis. You put your children to bed at night and you expect to see them in the morning. That's a luxury that people in Gaza just do not have. So what would it be like for you living under those circumstances?
And yet somehow we have to destabilize that moderate regime. And if you wonder why there's so many Muslims flooding into Europe, look no further than the Zionists that seek to destabilize every other moderate regime around them for their greater Israel project. And while you may cry at some of these false flags that are happening all over and this Operation Gladio style attacks that are causing purposeful tension, I challenge anyone who's against these Muslims to look at this drone videotape of cities that were homes to people. Look at the drone videotape. Look at what they've done to these people's homes. Do you think they want to be refugees? But no, the media would rather demonize these poor people who've been bombed out of their own homes and had to flee into a different continent rather than looking at the source of all of this. And while Barack Obama didn't lead grand invasions like the Bushes did, he did use these predator drones, more so than any other president out there. So while Barack Obama polishes his Nobel Peace Prize, Bradley Manning has been rotting away in prison facing charges that include aiding the enemy that carries the death penalty with it. Are you starting to smell the hypocrisy? In the groundbreaking investigation Dreams in Infrared, Der Spiegel exposes the story of a 27-year-old Air Force drone pilot named Brandon Bryant. It tells the story how he sets out to graduate from the top of his class and becomes a drone pilot working with a special unit of the United States Air Force in New Mexico. He flew Predator drones 7,000 miles away for 5 years in a windowless container. Bryant recalls the turning point of his life as a drone pilot. In the article he said, "There was a flat-roofed house made of mud, with a shed that was used to hold goats in the crosshair," as Bryant recalls. When he received the order to fire, he pressed the button on his left and marked the roof with a laser. The pilot sitting next to him pressed the trigger on the joystick, causing the drone to launch a Hellfire missile. There were 16 seconds left to impact. These moments are like in slow motion, he says today. Images taken with the infrared camera attached to the drone appeared on his monitor, transmitted by satellite with a 2 to 5 second time delay. With 7 seconds left to go, there was no one to be seen on the ground. Brian could have still have diverted the missile at that point. When it was down to 3 seconds, Brian felt as if he could count each individual pixel on the monitor. Suddenly, a child walked around the corner, he says. Second 0 was the moment that Brian's digital world collided with a real one in a village between Baghlan and Mazar al-Sharif. Brian saw the flash on the screen, the explosion. The parts of the building collapsed, and the child had disappeared. Brian had a sickening feeling in his stomach. Did we just kill a kid? Now we will discuss the second sin, the Obamacare fiasco.
I will actually give you a speech made up entirely, almost at the spur of the moment, of what a candidate for president would say if that candidate did not care about becoming president. In other words, this is what the truth is, and a candidate will never say, but what candidates should say if we were in a kind of democracy where citizens were honored in terms of their practice of citizenship, and they were educated in terms of what the issues were, and they could separate myth from reality, in terms of what candidates would tell them. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. I'm so glad to see you, and I would like to be president. Let me tell you a few things on health care. Look, we have the only health care system in the world that is designed to avoid sick people. And that's true, and what I'm going to do is I am going to try to reorganize it to be more amenable to treating sick people, but that means you, particularly you young people, particularly you young healthy people, you're going to have to pay more. Thank you. And by the way, we are going to have to, if you're very old, we're not going to give you all that technology and all those drugs for the last couple of years of your life to keep you maybe going for another couple of months. It's too expensive, so we're going to let you die. Also, I'm going to use the bargaining leverage of the federal government in terms of Medicare, Medicaid. We already have a lot of bargain leverage to force drug companies and insurance companies and medical suppliers to reduce their costs. But that means less innovation, and that means less new products and less new drugs on the market, which means you are probably not going to live that much longer than your parents.
How did anybody think that a government-controlled industry would result in greater efficiency and more coverage when the free market couldn't do that? It is bad enough that we have insurance companies between the patient and the doctor, but now we're going to throw in another government bureaucracy with all the regulations and somehow think it's going to be more efficient?
As we try to resuscitate this notion that we're all in this thing together, leave nobody behind, we do have to be innovative in thinking what are the delivery systems that are actually effective and meet people where they live. And my suggestion, I guess, would be that the trick, this is one of the few areas where I think there are technical issues that have to be dealt with as opposed to just political issues. I think the trick is figuring out how do we structure government systems that pool resources and hence facilitate some redistribution, because I actually believe in redistribution, at least at a certain level, to make sure that everybody's got a shot.
No, Obamacare was another huge tax plan and regulation to confiscate 1/7 of the United States economy.
This bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes. If CBO scored the mandate as taxes, the bill dies. Okay, so it's written to do that. In terms of risk-rated subsidies, if you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay, just like lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to getting the thing to pass. And, it's the second best argument. Look, I wish Mark was right. We can make it all transparent. But I'd rather have this law than not. So it's kind of like his reporter story. There's things I wish I could change, but I'd rather have this law than not.
Now the only part of the economy that is growing is the health industry. And that's because of this forced money that's being sucked into the healthcare industry.
We're going to be gifted with a healthcare plan we are forced to purchase and fined if we don't, which purportedly covers at least 10 million more people without adding a single new doctor, but provides for 16,000 new IRS agents, written by a committee whose chairman says he doesn't understand it, passed by a Congress that didn't read it but exempted themselves from it, and signed by a president who smokes with funding. Same sentence. With funding administered by a Treasury chief who didn't pay his taxes, for which we will be taxed for 4 years before any benefits take effect, by a government which has already bankrupted Social Security and Medicare, all to be overseen by a Surgeon General who is obese and financed by a country that's broke.
Now we will cover the third sin of Barack Obama. No president in the world has spent more money that we don't have than Barack Hussein Obama. When Barack Obama took office in January 2009, the national debt stood at close to $10 trillion. By the time he leaves office, he will have doubled it to nearly $20 trillion. That's $10 trillion in 8 years. $10 trillion that was more than all of the other presidents combined, including Great Depressions, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War. In fact, all wars were paid for less than what Barack Obama has spent. This is done purposely to destabilize the government, to give more power to the criminal elite that rises to the top, and to gut the middle class. There will be a tremendous payback. Even though we haven't felt it yet, it is coming. The 2008 financial crisis will look like nothing compared to the seeds that Barack Obama has laid over these past 8 years. If you do not own gold or silver, you will be generationally impoverished. Because after this next collapse, we will not have the opportunities like we did in the past. With the further concentration of wealth, the advent of artificial intelligence and robotics, most people will not have any real friends, real skills, or real wealth to create anything in the future. There's going to be a huge gap between those that have the technology and the wealth and those that don't. And since we don't have the opportunity of owning artificial intelligence labs or any of these high-tech stuff, the simplest, the most rational, the best thing to do is to be buying silver and gold and storing it for a future day. For when this global, generational, debt-based, fiat Ponzi scheme ends, it will not be pretty. No other president has sat in power and had more eyes looking at their citizens than Barack Obama. During his tenure, the rise of the NSA, the CIA, and the ability of the government to be able to spy on everybody's phone has reached untold proportions. Even after Edward Snowden exposed the NSA spying, there was no reform push forward to stop the government from doing what it should not be doing. No collective group of people should be able to do what an individual could not do. If I am not allowed to snoop on your phone, track you, trace you, look into all your accounts at once, neither should a government, especially without a warrant or just cause. Barack Obama laid the seeds for a future Orwellian police state that future generations will look back and wonder why we did nothing. The fifth sin of Barack Obama is the open border policy that he's had. Similar to the Syrian crisis earlier I explained, people don't come to this country poor and impoverished for no reason. The United States has had a policy since the Monroe Doctrine of destabilizing and funding criminal governments all over South America. There's been evidence that the United States has dealt with and trafficked drugs.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
We've overthrown democratically elected presidents. Heck, even policies like supporting our corn industry have had a tremendously horrible effect on other countries. Mexico was one of the first countries to harvest corn, and there was an estimated 1.1 million corn farmers in Mexico. And ever since the United States has supported the corn farmers so that nobody could grow corn profitably without this government support, we have put out of business 1.1 million corn farmers in Mexico. Without that generational crop in their families, they are forced to go to huge cities like Mexico City, or grow illegal drugs, or just be impoverished. And there's an added benefit to the criminal elite that run this country, to destroy the middle class, by bringing in desperate, cheap labor that will work for nothing, to bring more competition to the very few jobs that are still left in this country that haven't been exported to Asia. For if we don't have a vibrant middle class, the criminal elite will run roughshod over the rest of us. Poor, impoverished people are easily controlled, but the Founding Fathers knew that in order for this country to live and succeed in the future, the middle class had to be prosperous, healthy, and strong, something that is not in the interest of Barack Obama or the criminal elite that control him. The sixth sin is his executive power. Like all modern presidents, every single president has pushed the limit of executive powers, far exceeding what the Constitution empowered them to do. The worst form of executive power is sending troops into a battlefield without getting congressional approval, and now that seems normal. And while we have not seen a tremendous amount of executive power leveraged by Barack Obama, he has promised a, quote, audacious use of executive power in his final year. It is only in the final year that these presidents try to get away with as much as they can, knowing that they will not be held up for re-election, and they can pretty much get away with whatever they want. It is my bet by the end of his administration, wild legislation against our gun rights. The final sin of Barack Obama, as he presided over the destruction of the United States. During his administration, we've seen home ownership dip to the lowest level since 1965. We've seen median family income drop from $56,000 to $51,000. We've seen money printing triple under his administration. Healthcare costs soar under his administration. Labor force participation rates drop to generational lows. Federal debt has run up. Food stamps have run up. And student loans that have enslaved our youngest generation. This is an abhorrent legacy, and one that I'm sure that our next lesser of two evil candidates will outdo.